is Thursday, October 21st here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 7 Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And Jared, we're starting out this week with an exciting Denver at Cleveland Thursday night game. Browns are 2-point favorites here, down a little bit. That's down 2.5 points from where it opened, probably primarily because Baker Mayfield is out for this game. It looked for a little bit like the Broncos might not have their starting quarterback, but now we expect Teddy Bridgewater to start this game at least.
Yeah, Bridgewater in, Baker out, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt out, Odell Beckham probably out, Jarvis Landry maybe in for Cleveland. We'll see about that one. The Browns are going to be missing their right tackle, Jack Conklin. So all sorts of injuries in this game. Two slow-paced offenses, and it's supposed to be bad weather. There's supposed to be winds and rain in Cleveland tonight, so it's going to be super ugly. If this wasn't my job, I probably wouldn't watch the game tonight.
I know every time I was just thinking about this to myself. It's like maybe this is finally the Thursday night game that I don't watch. But I'm going to watch it. I'm going to watch it because I'll be curious to see what happens with Case Keenum. I'll be curious to see what Dearness Johnson actually looks like in real life. I guess let's start with Keenum because that's the name that we all know. Obviously probably only relevant for DFS and 2 quarterback leagues. We've seen the good and the bad from Case Keenum. The Denver defense seems like it should be a tough matchup, but the Broncos are actually down to 24th in overall DVOA, 21st against the pass and 20th against the run. So, I mean, not overly tough against anything right now.
Yeah, Denver's been smoked via the pass over the past 3 weeks. 10.2 yards per attempt, 5 touchdowns allowed, 0 interceptions against Lamar Jackson, Ben Roethlisberger, and Derek Carr. So not like a murderer's row of passers. That said, like you said, I mean, Keenum, low-end quarterback too. I think he's a capable backup. He's familiar with this offense. He spent some time with Stefanski in Minnesota, but you talk about the injuries, you talk about the weather, Odell Beckham is out. So I'm not super excited for Case Keenum. I think Cleveland's going to continue leaning on the ground, on the run game, even without Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say I'm excited for Case Keenum, but I'm kind of interested in jumping in some DFS showdown slate because I think, there's some surprise potential to Case Keenum, at least in the context of that one game. Dearness Johnson is going to be in a lot more lineups just because it's a 6-team bye. I mean, I didn't say that yet, but it's the first 6-team bye of this season and some good players that are missing. So Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, 2 of those that are missing because of calf injuries. That leaves Dearness Johnson as the top running back for Cleveland. 5'11", 200 pounds. The guy ran a 4.81 second 40 at his pro day. He's an undrafted free agent from 3 years ago now. He's got 40 total carries, 12 total targets through almost 2.5 pro seasons. I mean, I went and watched some Dearness Johnson highlights today just because all I really had was the funny name and the lack of production to this point. So I wanted to see something. I will say that after watching some highlights, I was impressed at how often South Florida sent Dearness Johnson downfield as a receiver.
All right, that's something. We'll take that. But I mean, Matt, running backs don't matter. They're all the same. Dearness Johnson, Nick Chubb. There's gonna be no drop off there. No, but I mean, he's just a volume play. I mean, so it's Dearness Johnson, Demetric Felton, and then John Kelly, who they promoted from the practice squad, who I think both of us loved coming out of Tennessee. Hasn't done anything in the NFL, and was on the practice squad until a few days ago. So I think Dearness Johnson is probably going to get 15 or so touches tonight. There's a chance he gets less than that. There's a chance he gets 20 touches in this ugly, low scoring weather affected game. So most weeks I call him an RB3. I think this week he sneaks into like lower end RB2 territory just with all the running backs on bye.
Yeah, don't overreach, but he's in the bottom of RB2 territory just because of the chance at volume. It's not a lock. We don't know how things are going to go with Cleveland, but he's the best bet, it looks like, for touches going in. The other guys, as you mentioned, John Kelly's in the mix. He's $300 in the DraftKings Showdown, by the way. So that's pretty interesting, given that John Kelly, probably just on raw talent, is at least even with Dearness Johnson. And then the other factor here is Demetric Felton, and it's tough to say whether he's technically a running back or a wide receiver. He hasn't played a lot so far. He has gotten some flashy touches. They've mostly come from wide receiver position. So, I mean, maybe he factors in like a Naheem Hines kind of way tonight. But again, with all the people they're missing, including probably Odell Beckham, it kind of just opens up the space for like any number of possible things to be the plan for Cleveland tonight.
Yeah, Felton has played 36 snaps this season. Only 2 of them have come in the backfield. 26 of them have been in the slot. And that's a good point you make about Beckham being out. Although I don't know if Jarvis Landry's back, if he slides back in the slot. Felton's going to be part of the game plan. I think it's going to be mostly in the passing game, though. I would expect Felton to lead the running backs in targets over Dearness Johnson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would. I was just thinking about this earlier and deciding whether to pick up Dearness Johnson on a team. And I can see the target upside for Demetric Felton, but after watching some Dearness Johnson, I was like, okay, he can at least catch passes. Maybe they throw the ball his way. So I don't know. Yeah, the only thing that I want to make sure I do tonight is not assume that I know too much in a situation where really, honestly, none of us knows anything about what's going to happen.
Yeah, if I could help it, I would not start Dearness Johnson, but I know a lot of fantasy teams, he's going to be their RB2 this week because the position is rough to begin with, and there are those 6 teams on bye.
Looking the other way, Cleveland's defense is 13th in DVOA, so not a great spot for a Denver team that hasn't been in awesome shape lately anyway. 20th against the pass are the Browns, 3rd against the run. I think Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant are fine. We'll see about the weather on that front. And regardless of whether Teddy Bridgewater plays, and obviously now, like we said, we're expecting Teddy Bridgewater to play. Beyond that, I don't think there's a whole lot exciting. I think I would play both Broncos running backs over Dearness Johnson because they're better players, but that's about as strong as I can say for anybody else.
Yeah, Sutton and Fant are locked in. The weather, we'll see how big of a concern that is. Tim Patrick's like a fringy option. He has averaged 6.5 targets over the last 4 weeks now. He's actually 29th among wideouts in our expected fantasy points. So he looked like a nice wide receiver 3 to me this week before this weather thing. He's someone that's a case where I would worry about the weather with someone like Patrick, who's sort of on the fringe to begin with. So you might have better options than him. And then, to me, like Gordon and Javonte Williams, obviously better players than Dearness Johnson. I would bet on Johnson leading both of them in total touches. And like you said, the matchup's pretty tough for Gordon and Javonte Williams. But they're both over the last 4 weeks. Javonte Williams is 20th in our expected fantasy points among running backs, and Melvin Gordon is 21st. So, despite splitting, there's been enough to go around to, make them both, lower end RB2s as far as usage goes.
And I think that this should be a game that doesn't take either of those guys or the running game in general out of the game script.
Yep, agreed.
Carolina at the Giants, Panthers by 3, over under 43 for this one. That tells you how exciting it is. Let's start with the Giants injuries first. No Kadarius Toney on Wednesday because of his ankle injury. Kenny Golladay remains out. Darius Slayton practice, but on a limited basis. He's dealing with a hamstring, hasn't played since week 3. And then even John Ross was out of practice Wednesday with a hamstring injury. So if you're a Giants wide receiver, you should just be sitting in a room by yourself somewhere, protecting your hamstrings. I think that the takeaway here is that Sterling Shepard is about to get 27 targets.
Yeah, and Golladay and Toney were out again on Thursday, so I actually just removed them from our rankings a few minutes ago. So it's going to be Shepard, hopefully Slayton, and then Dante Pettis was super involved last week. We'll see if John Ross makes it back. But yeah, Shepard, 9, 10, and 14 targets in his 3 healthy games this season. 27.5% of Daniel Jones' total attempts. Carolina just 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receiver. So Shepard's like a wide receiver too. I'd feel really good about this week.
And Azar Ahmed told us in the YouTube chat that John Ross did practice today. So maybe we will get saved from Dante Pettis getting 11 targets, at least this time. And really on that front, this should be an upside volume spot for Evan Ingram, but the Giants aren't giving it to him. He's seen 6, 4, and 5 targets in his 4 games back. He has 21 total targets in 4 games. Dante Pettis got 11 last week. That's how much Jason Garrett hates Evan Ingram. I can only assume it's because of the hair.
Yeah, that's telling that, he hasn't been able to get more than 6 targets with all these wide receiver injuries around him. The Giants threw a bunch of passes last week. Ingram's 18th in expected fantasy points among tight ends since he returned. Carolina's 7th in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. Just not a good spot for the Giants offense in general. So, Ingram's an option for some teams, but he's definitely outside our top 12 tight ends for this week.
Yeah, he's not a target. He's somebody, if you need a tight end and you're looking down there, sure, it's Evan Ingram. By the way, Jared, we didn't really talk about him before leaving the Browns game, but Brian Draper in Facebook wants to know, is Donovan Peoples-Jones going to score a touchdown tonight, which means either will he catch a Hail Mary or will he run over a quarterback and steal his soul?
Yeah, capable of either. Yeah, I mean, he's for showdown. I think he might be a better play than Jarvis Landry tonight, just not knowing, how healthy Landry is in his first game back. So I like DPJ for showdown, and he's a fringe option for season long.
Yeah, I would try to avoid him, but if you're looking deep enough where you're at like the bottom of wide receiver 4 range or wide receiver 5, then certainly there's upside as we saw last week. Getting back to the Giants game though, just like last week, Devontae Booker squarely in the mix because of all the missing running backs and really totally on volume. Just like last week, he's facing a tough defense. Against the Rams last week, 12 carries, 4 targets in that game. Did catch all of those for a nice 69 total yards.
Yeah, it was kind of the usage we expected for Booker. It was annoying seeing Elijah Penny steal the one goal line touchdown for the Giants, but Booker got 12 of the 15 running back carries. He played 72% of the snaps. He finished 24th among running backs in expected fantasy points last week. Carolina's first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, but Football Outsiders has them just 18th in run defense. So it's not a matchup I'm running away from. Booker doesn't have exciting upside, but he's going to get 15 plus touches, which this week is kind of all you can ask for out of a running back.
Right, he looks like a bronzed statue with that kind of touch outlook this week. Panthers side, Sam Darnold might have used up all of his magic over the first 4 weeks because he's been really bad over the past 2. That included 41.5% completions against the Vikings last time out. Did run for 48 yards, so as long as he keeps being Jalen Hurts, maybe he'll be okay. Also turned the ball over twice, though. Sam Darnold looks similar to Daniel Jones in that he's a mix of upside and downside, probably has a higher ceiling than Daniel Jones because he at least has some healthy receivers to work with, but both of them have the kind of floor that could really hurt your team.
Totally, yeah. Healthier receivers for Darnold, better matchup for him too. I mean, that's the only reason I'm like semi-interested in him, and why he sits like borderline quarterback 1 territory in our rankings. Giants 22nd in Football Outsiders pass D. They're 27th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. But yeah, Darnold's been bad for 3 straight weeks. Now he did have some drops last week. PFF charged both DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson with 3 drops apiece, so that definitely hurt the final numbers. But you had Matt Rule this week, talk about wanting to reestablish the run this week, probably because Darnold is playing so poorly. So that makes me like Chuba Hubbard, who if you have, you're probably starting him regardless. He's gotten nice usage. He's been top 15 among running backs in expected fantasy points in each of the last 2 weeks now. And this matchup is also good for him on the ground. So Hubbard, I believe, sits inside the top 12 in our running back rankings this week.
Yeah, and after a worrisome game at Dallas in the first start after the Christian McCaffrey injury, he's had 40 carries, 9 targets over the past 2 weeks. That was 91% of the running back carries for the team over that span, 82% of the running back targets. So, first game out, it looked like we're like, oh no, is Rodney Smith going to take the receiving stuff away from Chuba Hubbard? No, it was a 1-game blip. So I agree. Chuba Hubbard is a pretty safe start this week. Robbie Anderson, you mentioned, had the drops last week, has had plenty of those this year, has also had some erratic passing from his QB. If he's ever going to do it this season, it is this week. And if it doesn't happen this week, then it is officially time to completely give up on 2021 Robbie Anderson. Only 7 wide receivers have seen more targets than Anderson over the past 3 weeks, and they are Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Cortland Sutton, Devontae Adams, Antonio Brown, Terry McLaurin, and DJ Moore. Yet, despite tying for 8th among wideouts and targets, Anderson is tied for 48th in receptions. He ranks 78th in yards. Now he at least runs into a Giants defense that's giving the 3rd largest scoring boost to wide receivers by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. So again, if Robbie Anderson is going to do it at all this year, it's this week.
Yeah, as fantasy analysts, we're definitely supposed to tell you that, it's going to start breaking in Anderson's favor with this usage he's getting. It's just, and I think we talked about this last week, but it's not like we've never seen this guy do it before. It's not like he didn't have any chemistry with Sam Darnold coming into the season. So it's just strange that they've been this inefficient. He's a guy I wouldn't want to use Anderson in fantasy lineups this week, but again, the usage has been there. I know there's all these teams on bye, so. And like you said, the matchup is good. So he's definitely an option if you need him. He's someone I'd kind of want to see it from first before I trust him in lineups, though.
I would start Robbie Anderson this week over any Browns wideout.
Yes, I would too, including Jarvis Landry.
Mm-hmm. And then I think the only other guy I didn't really mention this game, Daniel Jones. I talked about his upside downside, but just to put it in some context, I dropped him this week in my FFPC main event league to pick up Matt Ryan to start in his place.
I mean, last week was ugly. It was his first bad game of the year. Like, he had been playing well in real life and fantasy before last week, but just with his history, you just worry if, old Daniel Jones is going to come back after last week. And this matchup is on the tougher side against Carolina. So if you made me pick between these two quarterbacks in this game, I would lean towards Sam Darnold.
And plus, even though he was playing well before the New Orleans game, he wasn't really scoring particularly well in fantasy. So there's not even that to kind of lean on. So yeah, lots of downside and lots of other guys with similar to better upside. Kansas City at Tennessee, Chiefs by 5.5, the over-under of 57.5. So a game we want some players from. On the Chiefs side, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, both managing injuries. I think we should expect both to play. Travis Kelce put in a limited practice Wednesday. Tyreek Hill did not practice, but he started out last week not practicing as well, ended up being fine in that game against Washington. The Titans are the most favorable matchup for QB scoring in the league and second best for wide receivers. So, I mean, it's a great spot for a Chiefs offense we already love. And really, the matchup only kind of matters for Mecole Hardman because we're just wondering whether he's going to get the targets.
Yeah, Hardman has finished as a top 38 fantasy wideout in 3 of the past 4 weeks now. He's gone wide receiver 34, 72, 20th, and then 38th. His like playing time hasn't really changed. He's still sitting just 40th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points. But if we think Mahomes is going to have a massive game here, which I do, Hardman should be a part of that, especially with Tyreek Hill. I mean, he put up the big numbers last week. He had 9 catches, 76 yards in a score, but his playing time was definitely limited. He only played 57% of Kansas City's offensive snaps. And like you said, he didn't practice on Wednesday. So we'll see if that snap rate climbs, but anytime he's off the field can't hurt Mecole Hardman's chances.
Yeah, certainly. The matchup, Tyreek Hill situation, and missing their starting running back certainly can't hurt the chances for Mecole Hardman to get those opportunities. Speaking of the running back situation, Darrell Williams got the start last week with Clyde Edwards-Helaire out, got 87.5% of the running back carries, 50% of the running back targets, split those with Jerick McKinnon. So we'll take that kind of split from Darrell Williams. He sits inside our top 10 at running back across formats for week 7.
Williams got I didn't go back and look, but he got as good or better usage than Clyde Edwards-Helaire has ever gotten as the Chiefs lead back. Williams finished 4th among running backs in expected fantasy points last week. He finished 7th among running backs in actual fantasy points, and excellent spot here against Tennessee. So I think Williams belongs as a top 12 fantasy back this week.
On the Titans side, I don't think there's anything sneaky. We're going to have to watch Julio Jones's hamstring. I wouldn't want to use him at this point, even if he's active, though. What about you?
I'd be surprised if he's active. I mean, if a guy misses 2 games with a hammy, then re-injures it, usually they end up missing at least the same amount of time with the aggravation. So I would not bank on Julio playing. That only helps AJ Brown, who usage was even better last week than it was in his week 5 return, and the production followed. After the goose egg in the first half of that game, ended up with a strong fantasy outing. Looks good, and obviously a good matchup here for AJ Brown.
Yeah, that was weird. He had nothing in the first half on 1 target, and then he had an awesome game in the second half, 7 catches for 91 yards on 8 targets. So the game script should be similarly in his favor this week. So yeah, I'm certainly like the idea of starting AJ Brown. It's also an upside spot for Ryan Tannehill. The Chiefs are still a positive matchup for quarterback scoring, even though Taylor Heineke let us down last week.
Yeah, it's a good spot. You got to hope you get some increased passing volume from Tannehill, which should happen if Tennessee's playing from behind. But he hasn't gotten that the last 2 meetings against the Chiefs. These teams have played each of the previous 2 seasons. Tannehill went for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns on 19 pass attempts in that first meeting in 2019, and then last year 209 yards and 2 touchdowns on 31 pass attempts. So Tennessee's been able to just ride Derrick Henry in these games. But I mean, even those games from Tannehill, he scored twice in both of them, so those won't kill you. And then if you do get 35, 40 pass attempts, he could really have a spike week.
Yeah, you got to know there's some downside risk, but he's I think like 8th in our quarterback rankings right now. Basically everybody from there down to 15 is the same kind of deal, where there's some downside and there's some upside, and probably not a high ceiling beyond that QB 7 or 8 spot.
Yes. Yep.
Anything else from that game?
Nope, that'll do it.
New York Jets at the New England Patriots. The Pats by 7.5, over under a 43. Honestly, this looks like a gross game to me. I mean, there's nothing you can trust on the Jets side. Corey Davis is in play, but he's no lock to lead the team in targets. Trailed Jamison Crowder in Crowder's first game of the season, and then only beat Crowder by 1 target the last time out against the Falcons. So the Pats haven't been good in coverage lately. They have fallen from, I think they were second in pass defense DVOA 2 weeks ago, and then they got shredded by Davis Mills and Dak Prescott. I think that there's still the capacity that they play tough in pass defense, and really it's like just enough that I don't want to play Jets anyway. So maybe it's, a little bit more reason not to.
Yeah, and this is the second meeting between these two teams. They played in week 2, and Zach Wilson was a disaster. 210 yards, 0 TDs, 4 interceptions. We'll see coming out of the bye week. Maybe that helps. And I do agree. Like New England's a beatable pass defense, but you can't really trust any of these wide receivers. I do think Davis is the best bet if you need to use one. I'm hoping Elijah Moore gets it going coming out of the bye here because he's been super disappointing so far.
Yeah, but certainly no reason to believe that it's going to happen yet. So, we'll see. I think before we get away from the Jets side, also a top 10 defense in DVOA for the Patriots. Michael Carter, Ty Johnson, Tevin Coleman, though, are all still involved. I mean, Michael Carter first among them, but it's really just an if you're desperate situation.
I mean, as we've been saying, Carter he's emerged as the lead back here, and the other 3 guys are still involved. It's still a committee, but Carter has 14, 12, 16, and 13 opportunities over the last 4 games now. So again, it's kind of Dearness Johnson level volume for Michael Carter. Probably going to be inefficient because he's on the Jets offense.
Mm-hmm. On the Patriots side, Jacoby Myers remains fine. I think Hunter Henry is decent for his position. Just 2 targets last week, but that was a season low for him. Touchdowns in 3 straight and 5+ targets in 3 straight games before last week.
Yeah, season high route rate for Hunter Henry last week at 77%. It's kind of been trending up over the last 4 weeks now. There just wasn't much passing volume to be had in New England last week, but he's still a pretty good bet, relatively speaking, this week. And the Jets are 22nd in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Football Outsiders has them 21st in tight end coverage, so it's a nice individual matchup for Henry too.
Yeah, not much play volume in general for the Patriots last week, but Damian Harris was nice. 18 carries, 101 yards, a touchdown in that game. He's off the injury report this week after playing through a week 6 questionable tag for a rib injury. So he should be good to go as a fantasy option at least. Brandon Bolden came away from that game with a thigh issue. And even before that, it looks like maybe Ramondre Stevenson has kind of replaced him as that number 2 running back.
Yeah, Stevenson was their pass catching back last week. He led Patriots running backs in pass routes. He led them with 3 targets, had 5 carries for 23 yards and a score. I mean, you're going to need more from Stevenson for him to be a real fantasy factor. I still think he's an interesting stash, but not really a starting option yet. Like you said, Damian Harris, stepped back into that lead role last week, had 18 of New England's 24 running back carries. He went for 62 yards and a score on 16 carries against the Jets back in week 2. The Jets are 29th in adjusted points allowed to running backs.
Yeah, I think Stevenson is slightly more interesting than Brandon Bolden because he would take more carries if Damian Harris goes down. But yeah, I don't think that he's a real starting option right now. It is worth mentioning he had 5 carries, 3 targets, and just 18 snaps against Dallas. So did get the ball a fairly high percentage of the time he was on the field, for whatever that's worth. Cincinnati at Baltimore, Ravens by 6.5, over under 46.5. A week after allowing Carson Wentz to throw for 390 and yielding a season high 513 total yards to the Colts, the Ravens held the Chargers to a season low 208 total yards and 6 points. I think when you balance out those 2 games right next to each other, I would say don't upgrade any Bengals passing game options or avoid them. Lean away from using them if close, but it's certainly not a matchup that you have to stay away from.
I mean, the scary thing to me is that the Bengals have a 20-point implied total. Like I'd bet on them beating that, but Vegas is Vegas for a reason. They tend to be right about this stuff. So that has me shying away from the offense a little bit. And that said, Joe Burrow is playing awesome. His efficiency, he's 5th in the NFL in completion rate, 4th in yards per attempt, 4th in touchdown rate, 7th in quarterback rating. He's been just okay in fantasy because the volume hasn't been there, but that volume has been coming up. The Bengals have finished top 15 in situation neutral pass rate in 3 straight weeks now. Burrow has 33 passes per game over that span after having just 25 passes per game over the first 3. So if that maintains, then I think, he's back as a lower end quarterback one most weeks. And this matchup too. So Baltimore is the 3rd blitz heaviest defense in the NFL. Burrow has the 2nd highest PFF grade against the blitz this season. He's been good when blitz. So this matchup might kind of play into his favor.
I wonder if that combo plays into Tyler Boyd's favor by making him attractive as a shorter range target. I can't say that I like it enough to actually take a shot on him unless I'm looking well down the rankings and like wide receiver 4 territory and looking for somebody with some upside. I think there's a chance at volume upside. At the same time, Tyler Boyd hasn't topped 62 receiving yards in a game against the Ravens since 2018.
Yeah, and his usage has been disappointing alongside T. Higgins. In the 4 games Higgins has played this season, just 5.3 targets per game for Boyd in those. He needs a lot more than that to deliver just the type of short range player he is. But he does have the best matchup here against slot corner Tavon Young. He's 80th among 97 corners in PFF's coverage grades, and like you said, the Burrow having to get the ball out quicker against the blitz could kind of feed into Boyd's hands too. So he's an option. But again, the floor is so low just because the volume he's gotten in years past is not there anymore.
Yes, I think you can use it as a tiebreaker against guys similarly in wide receiver 4 range, but not a reason to get excited about Tyler Boyd this week. Easily, by far, the weakest coverage spot for the Ravens has been running back so far. So maybe that helps Joe Mixon, who has been helping himself pretty well this season.
Yeah, I mean, the carry volume has been there every week. The targets have been all over the place. It was nice to see him get back up to 6 targets last week. We'll see if that continues. But I mean, he's averaging 20.2 carries in his 5 healthy games this season. So that alone makes him an easy start.
Let's hope Samaje Perine's return from the COVID list does not siphon any targets from that total. On the Baltimore side, Latavius Murray, no practice Wednesday because of his ankle injury. I think if Murray is out for this game, Devontae Freeman is disturbingly in play for fantasy lineups. And, we'll see in that eventuality what the role is for Tyson Williams.
Yeah, I would imagine if Murray's out, and I do think Murray's going to miss. Dr. Chow thinks he's dealing with a high ankle sprain. The team hasn't confirmed that yet, but if that's the case, he's definitely not playing this week. But so if Latavius is out, I would imagine Tyson will be active. I have no idea how touches and snaps will be divvied. Le'Veon Bell actually out-snapped Devontae Freeman 22-21 last week. Freeman had 1 more carry and he had 2 targets to Bell 0. It's going to be a committee. Like Freeman's probably the best bet, but don't expect more than 12 carries and a few targets.
Yeah, and similar to Cleveland, don't assume that you know more than you do, because we are all guessing about this based on some varied situations to this point. We've seen Tyson Williams be the backfield leader. We've seen, as you just mentioned, a pretty even split in playing time between Devontae Freeman and Le'Veon Bell. All we really know is that none of these guys is exciting, and none of them should climb too far up your rankings.
Yes.
Sammy Watkins still not practicing Wednesday after missing last week as well. That doesn't really matter so much for whether he's in lineups, but it leaves more room if he's still out this game for Rashad Bateman, who saw some solid usage in his debut for the year.
I mean, the fantasy production wasn't huge because Baltimore's passing game didn't do much. It kind of didn't need to in the game against the Chargers, but 6 targets for Bateman. That tied for the team lead, 22% target share. The playing time was decent for his first game, 65% of the snaps, 67% of the routes. I would expect that to just grow from here. Better spot here, should be increased passing volume, you'd think, out of Baltimore. So I think Bateman's right in play as a wide receiver 3 this week. Obviously some risk in just his second game, but we know he's a big talent.
There better be more passing this week after I started Lamar Jackson over Dak Prescott last week. Sure. Washington at Green Bay, Packers by 9.5, over under of 49. The Packers are implied for 29.25 points. That's 5th on the slate. The first team as you go down the rankings that's not in the 30-point range. The gap between them and number 6, Baltimore, though, is pretty sizable. So like the scoring outlook for the Packers in this one. And Devontae Adams owners could really use a bounce-back game from him. Not that you're thinking about sitting him, but it was disappointing to see him not deliver big numbers for us last week.
He's had 3 games like that. He's finished wide receiver 52, wide receiver 34, and wide receiver 28. So, despite the volume, he's been sort of a volatile weekly producer. But you're obviously starting him here. Washington 32nd in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. MVS eligible to return this week. Haven't heard if he's going to yet, but that's exciting for my best ball teams at least. I think the other fringy guy here would be AJ Dillon, who 16, 12, and then 11 opportunities over the past 3 weeks now. He did set a season high with a 42% snap rate last week. So, I'm not like super worried about Aaron Jones yet because of Dillon, but I think Dillon's seeing enough work in this week and in this matchup where, he could be an RB3 or flex option for you this week.
Yeah, 11 plus touches in each of those games. Playing time has been up over the past 3 weeks. So, normally it'd be like, okay, this is somebody to watch. But this week it's legitimately somebody to consider using in a lot of places. I agree. On the Washington side, no Antonio Gibson, no Terry McLaurin, no Ricky Seals-Jones at Wednesday's practice. It's the shin issue for Gibson as it has been for weeks. We'll kind of see where he is with that this week after his playing time was down last week. Terry McLaurin is the hamstring, which was supposed to be an abundance of caution over the weekend, and he ended up playing through. So we'll see where that goes this week. And Ricky Seals-Jones was a quad issue. He played every snap in the game last week, though. So I'm going to choose to not be concerned about that right now.
And the Washington beat writers were saying that McLaurin, RSJ, and Gibson were all back at practice on Thursday. So, McLaurin and RSJ, I wasn't worried about to begin with. It looks like Gibson's going to keep trying to play through this stress fracture in his shin. I don't know what you do with him if you have him. There's the floor is so low now because he could just leave any game early because trouble with that shin. So tough spot.
Yeah, look into trading him. I wouldn't just unload him for whatever you can get. Make sure it's something useful. But somebody asked earlier today in our Discord, should I trade Antonio Gibson for Calvin Ridley or Antonio Brown? And I said yes, either one. Ridley first.
Easy yes. Yes.
Anything else from this game?
I think J.D. McKissic is interesting now. Already playing a big role in the passing game, and he's not going to be even a 15 carry guy, I don't think. But Washington's shown that they'll give him 8-10 carries per game. If you add that on to 5, 6, 7 targets, he definitely becomes interesting, especially in PPR.
This is such a rough week that J.D. McKissic didn't even stand out to me as somebody you need to talk about. It was just like, yeah, J.D. McKissic is definitely in the starter mix this week.
Yeah, I believe he's in the top 25 of our PPR running back rankings.
He's Cordero Patterson this week.
Oh, baby.
Atlanta at Miami. This opened with the Dolphins as a 1-point favorite. Now it's at 2.5 in favor of the road Falcons. So that's disrespectful to Miami. Fresh off a trip to London that usually means a bye the next week. Disrespected by the NFL. If I were a coach, I would be trying to plant that as a chip on all their shoulders.
I might be wrong about this, but I think I read back in the summer that the NFL gave teams the option whether they wanted their bye after the London game or not. And Miami evidently chose not to take it and to get it later on in the season. But it's definitely a factor, I think. Have we seen a team playing after the week in London? I think this might be the first time. And and on top of that, you have Atlanta coming off a bye week, so they're extra rested. So that definitely might have something to do with the line movement in this game.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens between these two teams. But this game's not overly exciting anyway, so it's good to add some intrigue to it. Matt Ryan has actually been solid since his horrid opener against Philly. 2+ touchdown passes in each of the 4 games since then. He's been over 240 yards passing and 19 fantasy points in each of those games as well. Miami, meanwhile, started pretty well on defense, but now is a slightly positive scoring matchup for QBs. So, I kind of started out the year thinking, Matt Ryan. And now it's like, I guess I got to change my mind about Matt Ryan. He's okay.
Yeah, he's actually, in his last 2 games, he's finished 2nd and 4th among quarterbacks in PFF passing grade. So he's playing well on top of the fantasy points starting to come. He gets Calvin Ridley back this week. We'll see about Miami's top 2 corners, Xavier Howard and Byron Jones, who both missed that Jags game. That's what turns this into a really strong matchup if they're both out again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Calvin Ridley is back. A somewhat quiet start to the year, but only because we had lofty expectations for him. He's had 8+ targets, 5+ catches in each of the first 4 games, 10+ targets, and 7+ catches in each of his past 3. And Matt Ryan, the past 2 times out, has posted his 2 highest average depth of targets and 2 highest PFF passing grades of the season in those games, even though we didn't have Ridley for one of those games. So a good spot for Calvin Ridley to be coming back to, and maybe the last best chance to try for a buy low on him.
Yeah, I think Ridley is going to, kind of have his breakout game of the season on Sunday. Like you said, the usage has been there. He's actually fourth among wideouts in expected fantasy points per game. He just really hasn't. I don't know, does he have a touchdown? You might have like one touchdown. He hasn't made many big plays. But all the usage you want to see has been there. He's still a good player. Matt Ryan's playing better again. Miami's corners both dealing with injuries, so it's a really nice spot for Ridley. He's someone I'm going to be using in DFS tournaments this week for sure.
Kyle Pitts is an every week starter, and that's especially true after last time out. He delivered a big one for us in week 5. And then the backfield, we have to sort out. Mike Davis, I mean, this week he looks like Eddie George just because we know he's going to get carries. He got fewer than Cordero Patterson the last time they were both on the field, though.
Yeah, first time all season. It was 14 carries for Patterson to 13 for Mike Davis. Patterson's role was way expanded in that London game. I think that was at least partly due to Calvin Ridley being out, at least as far as the passing game usage goes. He saw 9 targets in that game. But again, the fact that he out-carried Mike Davis, that's interesting. We'll see what Atlanta does with the backfield coming out of the bye week now. I would not be surprised if it's, at least basically a 50-50 split in carries between Davis and Patterson.
Yeah, I'm certainly not worried about Patterson's role coming out of the bye, even with Calvin Ridley and Russell Gage coming back, because the way that he's played so far and the way the whole offense has looked, they would be stupid to not keep him heavily involved. But, it'll be interesting to see if they say, all right, we're going to make sure that Patterson gets more snaps and touches going forward, or we're going to scale him back so we don't overwork him and wear him out for the later part of the year now that we have some more help back at wideout.
Yep.
Russell Gage is back, as you mentioned. I'm not sure how much that means. We will see what that effect has on Patterson. We'll see whether Russell Gage gets any targets, but you got to be looking really well down the list for Russell Gage to be even semi-interesting, I think.
Well down the list.
On the Miami side, Devontae Parker put in a limited Wednesday practice dealing with shoulder and hamstring issues, so we'll see whether he can make it back. Preston Williams was limited. We'll see if he's back. Will Fuller will not be back yet. He'll be eligible to come off IR after this game. So should be a similar wide receiver picture. We'll see about Parker and Preston Williams. Tua looked pretty good against the Jaguars last week. He's in the mix just outside our top 12.
I mean, obviously had the plus matchup against Jacksonville, but Tua also finished 6th among quarterbacks in PFF passing grade last week. So it was a nice performance in his first game back. And, he gets another good matchup here. Atlanta's 30th in Football Outsiders pass defense rankings. They're 25th in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. I mean, it would help, too, if he could get Devontae Parker back. I mean, I think that would make him a more interesting Week 7 starter.
We have to remember, though, the PFF has some Europeans at the top of the hierarchy, so that probably added to Tua's grading performance in that game.
That's fair.
Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki are solid. You have to keep in mind that they have the downside risk of not getting a bunch of targets, but you can't really hate the situation for them heading into this week.
I mean, Gesicki's he's top 8 among tight ends in any metric you look at: targets, pass routes, expected fantasy points. And even dating back to last season, Tua has been good for Gesicki. There's obviously some chemistry there between those two guys.
He's probably at least top 5 among tight ends in dunking ability and volleyball talent as well.
Easy. Number 1, I think.
Myles Gaskin, 14 total yards last week. So we knew that the 10 catches were a mirage. He reminded us last week. He did get 6 targets, though, and he has seen 5+ targets in 5 of his 6 games so far. Has also seen just 5 carries or fewer in 4 of his past 5 outings.
Yeah, that Week 4 game where he only got 2 opportunities, that's kind of been the outlier. Other than that, he's been around 10 to 15 opportunities. He was just super inefficient last week. I mean, 5 carries for 9 yards and then 2 catches on 6 targets for 5 yards. I mean, you're going to get 5 to 8 carries out of him, and then probably 4, 5, 6 targets. So he's an option in PPR leagues, especially in a pretty good matchup here against Atlanta. But the upside is just not there because we know he's not going to get 20 opportunities in any game.
Yeah, the playing time was also down versus Jacksonville, but that might have just been the British to American conversion. Anything else from that game?
Nope, I'll do it.
Philadelphia at Las Vegas. The Raiders by 3, over under 49.5. That's up 2 points from where it opened. Dallas Goedert is set to be the lead tight end again. So just a couple weeks after we talked about him as a sell, suddenly looks like he might be a buy. And he came off the COVID list Thursday morning, so he will be back for this game. If you combine Dallas Goedert's numbers with Zach Ertz's for this season, you have the number 3 tight end in PPR so far. I'm not going to go ahead and project him for all of the things that both of those guys got so far, but behind Dallas Goedert on the depth chart at the position are undrafted free agent Jack Stoll and QB conversion, the next Logan Thomas, Tyree Jackson, who is so new that I'm going to add a K onto his name. And he just came off of IR, so I don't even know how soon he's actually going to play football for the Eagles.
Yeah, I mean, if you drafted Goddard, this is exactly what you wanted. And we saw 4 games of Goddard last year without Zach Ertz. He averaged 5.8 targets, 4.3 catches, 50 yards, and half a touchdown per game. That'll work. Goddard and Ertz have averaged 8.3 targets per game combined this season. That's a number Goddard could get to. And his first game of the season without Zach Ertz comes against Vegas, who is 30th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, 23rd in Football Outsiders tight end coverage ranking. So Goddard, easy top 8 tight end, really could be a top 5 tight end the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I'll have a trade proposal for him, I think, later. And when we get to the next game, actually, on this list, Devontae Smith, though, sticking with the Eagles, kind of is what he is at this point. There's going to be upside to him just about every week, but there's also downside every week in that the chance that his quarterback just doesn't throw him the ball and the chance that his quarterback doesn't have a good passing game, which was the case for nearly all of the Thursday night loss to the Bucs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the usage is there for Devontae Smith, but just the passing game is so inconsistent. He's going to be inconsistent. He has 3 weekly finishes inside the top 27 wideouts, but the other 3 are wide receiver 86, wide receiver 69, and wide receiver 71. So, I mean, you just got to know that he might give you a solid week, but there's also a chance he's going to kill you.
Yes, it's not quite boom bust because I don't think he truly has the boom potential. I don't think there is really that 10 to 12 target upside. So it's short of boom bust, but it's like help or bust.
I like it.
I think it's a similar deal with Miles Sanders. The touch shares are there, the performance is there, but the total opportunities continue to not be.
Exactly. I mean, he's 7th among running backs in total snaps. He's played 69% of the Eagles' snaps. So he's on the field. Philly just hasn't run the ball. They're 23rd in run rate. They're 28th in situation neutral run rate. The Eagles running backs as a group are 31st in carries. Only the Dolphins, I believe, have fewer running back carries than Philly. But the running game's been good. Sirianni made a comment this week about wanting to get Miles Sanders going a little bit. As I like him this week. I think he's a good DFS tournament play, and I think he's someone I'd feel okay about as a running back too in fantasy lineups. The receiving stuff has been there too for Miles Sanders. He's top 15 in targets and catches. He just needs he needs Eagles to run the ball a bit more, and if they do, then he's set up to be pretty productive the rest of the season.
It's about time Nick Sirianni says that he wants to get Miles Sanders going, because the last time I heard him say anything, it was like, I'm actually calling more runs than you think I am. It's just that Jalen Hurts keeps it himself on the RPO stuff, and that's garbage. So I don't know how you could watch the Eagles offense, especially as the guy in charge of the Eagles offense, and not think that they need to run the ball more, because you can't just rely on this offense throwing 60% of the time in neutral situations and winning most of its football games, which I would assume is the goal, but we'll see.
You'd assume.
On the Vegas side, the Eagles defense is now in the league's bottom half overall in DVOA. It's 12th against the pass, 25th against the run. So a soft matchup for the run game, and Josh Jacobs sits inside our top 15, both because of that and because he saw 76% of Raiders running back carries last week. So, I mean, I think Josh Jacobs already in a fair spot. I might start him over Devontae Booker even because of a favorable matchup and favorable game script.
Yeah, the usage for Jacobs has been better since he came back from that injury. Obviously leading Vegas in carries, but also doing a bit more in the passing game. I know he only had the 1 target last week, but the route rate was still up around 50%, which is higher than it had been. He's been top 20 among running backs in expected fantasy points in each of the last 3 weeks. And like you said, the matchup's good here. So I think Jacobs is a solid RB2 this week.
And, I mentioned the pass defense ranking 12th. That's, better than their run defense, but it's also not anything that changes the outlook, I think, for the Raiders offense. So I'm certainly not downgrading Derek Carr, and I'm not altering my outlook for any of his pass catchers here.
Yeah, it was a good bounce back from Carr last week, coming off 2 disappointing games, at least from a fantasy perspective. But, he's now finished as a top 12 fantasy quarterback in 4 of 6 games this season. We also saw, John Gruden out last week, Greg Olsen calling plays. The Raiders really boosted their play action rate, which we always like. It was at 31% last week after being just 12% over the first 5 games of the season. So we'll see if that continues under Greg Olsen.
Nice. I tried to get Derek Carr in my FFPC league instead of Matt Ryan, but he went for, I think, at least 4 times the price of what Matt Ryan did. So kind of stuck.
I think they're basically a toss-up this week. I think maybe I'll get lucky and get the better quarterback anyways.
Mm-hmm. Anything else you like from this game?
Nope.
Detroit Lions at the LA Rams. Rams by 16. College lines on the NFL slate this week. Over under a 50 in this game. The Rams carry the week's highest implied total at 33. The Lions are tied with the Bears for the second lowest, and they're thankful that the Texans are still in the league. It was a nice bounce back for TJ Hawkinson last week. 8 catches, 74 yards on 11 targets against the Bengals. His playing time has remained steady while he's been managing the knee issue. He's still open this week, not practicing because of that knee, though. So it's a reminder that he's dealing with it. And really, I would be willing right now to package TJ Hawkinson in a move to get Dallas Goedert plus an upgrade at another position.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would not be surprised if Goedert outscores Hawkinson the rest of the way because really, the reason we like Hawkinson is the usage. The routes are there. The targets have been there for the most part. I mean, he's still 4th among tight ends in targets. But Goddard now could get that same usage as TJ Hawkinson. And, it's a better offense. Philly's a better offense. Not saying Philly's a great passing game, but I like them over the Lions passing game. So, yeah, I would make that move too. Hawkinson, though, I mean, you just have to lock him in as an every week starter. Like, he's going to have down games because he's playing with Jared Goff and he's playing on the Lions. But, again, he's top 6 in every tight end metric you want to look at: routes, targets, expected fantasy points. So you just got to stick with him.
Yeah, I'm starting him where I have him, but after the show, I'm going to go make at least an offer or two and hope that people aren't watching. Amon-Ra St. Brown remains at least relevance adjacent. He has 8 and 7 targets over the past 3 games. Last game had 5 catches for 26 yards against the Bengals, doing a great Chase Edmonds impression.
Yeah, I mean, he's a volume play. There should be 40-plus pass attempts from the Lions in this game again as massive underdogs. Amon-Ra St. Brown's route rate has climbed each of the last 3 weeks too. Is up to a season high 80% last week. So I mean, he's there if you need him.
Yeah, and that's really about all that we should say for the Lions side, right?
Yeah, I mean, DeAndre Swift locked in. Jamal Williams at this point, like almost a fantasy non-factor. He's just getting almost phased out completely of the passing game, and even the carries are going to be volatile when you're on a bad offense.
I refuse to even know what Khalif Raymond's usage looks like right now. So I'm going to jump to the Rams side, and there's really not much to talk about here either. You're starting all of these guys, and I think at least at some level that includes Tyler Higbee against a defense that Football Outsiders rates as the worst in the league in tight end coverage this season. Yeah,
I think Higbee to me looks like a low-end tight end 1 moving forward if you look at the usage, but he gets a boost in this matchup, obviously, with the good matchup, with the high implied total. Like he's, one of the better touchdown bets among tight ends this week.
Yes. Chicago at Tampa Bay, another college line with the Bucs favored by 13 points, over under 47, which is actually down 2 from where it opened. I guess they're just figuring that Tom Brady will get a little tired from all the scoring as that game goes on. On the Bears side, I guess first question, is Damian Williams off the COVID list yet?
He's not. I would expect him to get off it. And if that's the case, I try to just avoid this backfield altogether. And we know how bad of a matchup Tampa is for running backs. If Williams is out, though, I think Herbert then becomes an option just because, I mean, he got awesome usage last week, 89% of the snaps, all 19 running back carries. He got 3 targets. Like even against Tampa, if you can count the guy for, 15 to 20 touches, Herbert would be a decent fantasy play.
Yeah, I would hope that if you need to use either of these guys, that Damian Williams is not out so that you can just use Herbert. If Williams is back, I would hope to not have to use either one. I would go ahead and start Dearness Johnson over either of them tonight. But if they are both back, I think I would personally lean Herbert just because I think there's more upside to him, barring some kind of signal from Matt Nagy's coaching staff that we know what we're going to get from the Williams-Herbert split heading into the game. Otherwise, I mean, Herbert got more carries than Damian Williams in the one game that they shared after David Montgomery went down, and then has been the one of the two to actually show some upside.
Yeah, I think Herbert is a better runner right now, and we've only seen him for a couple games, so it could be wrong. Of course, all that matters is what the Bears coaching staff thinks. My thing is, I think Damian Williams would still get most of the passing down work. I don't know, coaches just prefer the veterans in that role. And he's been good enough in the passing game throughout his career. That's kind of why I'd lean towards him, just because I don't think there's going to be a lot of carries to go around in this game. Chicago big underdogs. We know teams don't really try to run against Tampa in general. So that again, if Williams is back, try to avoid both Williams and Herbert this week.
Yeah, Bucks opponents are only averaging 16.4 rushing attempts per game this year. That's down 6 even from last year's number, which was already the fewest in the league at 22.5, I think was the average. On the Bucs side, according to Pewter Report at least, there was no Rob Gronkowski or Antonio Brown still at Thursday's practice. Gronk has yet to return from his litany of internal injuries. Antonio Brown has missed the past 2 days with an ankle injury, so we're going to have to watch him heading into the weekend. Obviously, missing either or both of them is going to boost other guys in the Tampa Bay offense, including O.J. Howard, who returned to practice on Thursday.
Okay, I was going to say, because I know he missed Wednesday with an ankle. Even Howard, though, Cameron Brate ran more routes last week than O.J. Howard. Howard had the big game, obviously, 7 targets, 6 catches, 49 yards, and a score. But Brate saw 4 targets of his own. Brate ran a route on 65% of the dropbacks to just 44 for O.J. Howard. So I would still prefer Howard among the two, just as the bigger talent, but he's still not a safe fantasy play, even if Rob Gronkowski remains out.
Mm-hmm. And then I mean that's pretty much it here. The other guys are obvious, I think.
Lenny Fournette, baby, RB1.
Yeah. Apparently, Bruce Arians, by the way, laughed at the notion of trading Ronald Jones. So for any of us who are hoping that maybe there was a Ronald Jones trade, it doesn't sound like it's coming for Bruce Arians.
Yeah, that's fine. It's Fournette's backfield.
Houston at Arizona, Cardinals by 17.5. Like I said, we've entered the college portion of this slate. Over under of 47 in this game. The Cardinals have the second highest implied team total for the week at 32.25. Houston, once again, the lowest at sub 15 points. For the Texan side, it's Brandon Cooks, and don't look at anything else. On the Arizona side, I'll start with Chase Edmonds because he's playing through a shoulder injury that's going to be frustrating for anybody who's deciding whether to play him. Last week, he basically sat out the second half in a blowout win at Cleveland. His practice participation leading up to that game was better than the week before, but he only saw 8 opportunities and all of them were in the first half. So I think this looks like a prime opportunity for the Cardinals to do the same thing. And if, unless he's back to full practices by the weekend, they should have every reason to limit his exposure this weekend.
Yeah, and even in week 5, which was a more competitive game, he saw just 6 carries and 4 targets. So it definitely seems to me that the shoulder is limiting his volume, and I completely agree. Arizona should be up multiple scores going into the half here, and they could definitely rest or at least limit Edmonds in the second half. So I would not try to use him. I do think James Conner is a nice play this week. I mean, he's been getting double-digit carries basically every game. He's Arizona's clear goal line back, and with their implied total, I think he's a pretty strong touchdown bet this week.
Yes, he has seen 57% of his rushing attempts in the second halves of games so far this year. He has 5 touchdowns from inside the 10-yard line versus 0 for Chase Edmonds. So for both of those factors, I agree on James Conner this week. DeAndre Hopkins had a nice fantasy outing last week, and he's obviously starting for you, but his target share is still way down versus last year, about 8 percentage points lower. He leads the team in targets, but he's at like 19.5%, which is a lot different than what we're used to, which is target hog DeAndre Hopkins. It doesn't kill you. He's still going to be fine as a fantasy receiver, but it makes him a sell candidate because of the name and because of the history of production.
Yes, he's not. I don't think he's going to finish as a top 5 fantasy wideout this year, which is about where he was drafted. I do still think he's like a lower end wide receiver 1. He's getting enough volume. It's obviously one of the better offenses in the NFL. He still looks good to me, but I don't think the target volume is going to change much the rest of the way, especially with Zach Ertz added to the mix now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's only more people to spread it to. Behind Hopkins at wideout, by the way, AJ Green, then Christian Kirk, then Rondale Moore. That's how it's gone in playing time. That's how I think I would play them for that reason in terms of choosing who's going in my lineup.
Yep, I'd agree. Kind of looked like Moore's role was growing. He ran more routes than Kirk last week, but that flipped again in week 6. Moore has been getting the ball on the ground a lot lately. He has 1, 2, 3, and 3 carries over the last 4 games now, and 4 of those carries have come in the red zone. So they're Arizona's scheming stuff up to get Rondale Moore with the ball. So his usage is like better than the playing time makes it look, but he's still a shaky fantasy option. And of course now, we'll see what happens to his playing time with Zach Ertz here.
And I mean, increased rushing, we're still talking about 3 carries a game. Plus we'll see whether that changes as Chase Edmonds gets healthy again. So, it's reason to keep an eye on Rondale Moore, to keep him stashed on your roster, but try not to start him at this point.
Yep.
Anything else from this game?
Should we talk about Zach Ertz? Yes. So
he's just the new Max Williams, isn't he?
Well, that's the question. So I mean, Max Williams was like a tight end 2 in usage. He averaged 4 targets in his healthy games this season. He was 24th in expected fantasy points among tight ends in those games. So if that's the role Zach Ertz is playing, then he's a spot starter that you're kind of hoping for a touchdown from. We'll see if they view Zach Ertz as better than Max Williams, get him a bigger role in the offense. In that case, he could be someone who's like a lower end tight end 1 just because this offense is so good.
Zach Ertz is definitely a bigger name than Max Williams, even though that one's more fun to say. But they traded a cornerback who couldn't even crack their rotation of weak cornerbacks and a 6th round pick. So they were like, fine, Eagles, if you don't want Zach Ertz anymore, we will give you a half-eaten sandwich for him, and he can fill in for the younger guy that just went down for us.
Yeah, Williams actually had a higher PFF receiving grade than Zach Ertz this season, in 4 or 5 games or whatever it was for Williams.
Mm-hmm. On to Indianapolis at San Francisco on Sunday night. The 49ers by 4, over under 44. T.Y. Hilton is unsure for this game after hurting a quad in his first game back, was out of practice Wednesday. Do we know anything about him for Thursday yet?
No, I haven't seen anything on his practice participation on Thursday. I'd be surprised if he plays though, just coming off an injury, then he suffers a soft tissue injury. I would expect him to miss this game.
Yeah, so we'll see how this one goes. Paris Campbell landed on IR with an injury of his own. That's only noteworthy because it's another wide receiver missing. It makes Michael Pittman even easier to start in this game against San Francisco. I think all of it also puts Zach Pascal into play in wide receiver 4 territory if T.Y. Hilton is out for the game.
Yeah, I would definitely go back to Pittman. Season low 3 targets for him last week, but Carson Wentz only threw it 20 times. That was the concern for Pittman last week, is just, would Indy have to throw it against Houston? But, Pittman should go back to dominating targets, especially with Hilton and Paris Campbell out. And I think, Wentz throws it more than 20 times on Sunday night.
Yeah, and Pittman still played more than Hilton, so it could even just be a bad luck thing with him not leading the team in targets for that one. Maybe it's a positive game script for Nyheim Hines, but the Colts have lost 4 games already this year, and Nyheim Hines has only been PPR relevant in 2 of them. So don't count on it being a Nyheim Hines game. He also has yet to be relevant in a game where Marlon Mack has played. Mack has played in 4 games so far, and in those 4 games, Hines has seen a total of 7 targets and 11 carries versus 15 carries and 14 targets in just the 2 games that Marlon Mack did not play.
Jonathan Taylor's route rate is also climbing. The last 3 weeks, it's gone 35%, then 42%, then 61% last week. So we'll see if that trend continues. But that's obviously eating away at what Nyheim Hines does.
It's kind of curious why they bothered to go ahead and pay Nyheim Hines when they did. I guess it's nice. I don't dislike it because it's a guy getting money for what he's done so far. But kind of a curious decision by the team given how they've used him since then.
Agreed.
On the Niners side, and I mean, if anybody's wondering, I'm not playing a Colts tight end unless I'm held at gunpoint and forced to do so.
Well, Cox, he scores again last week, but still just 39% of the pass routes. They're just not going to give him the role we need him to be in to be able to trust him.
Yeah, if you want to bet on Mo Ali Tunyon, then you can, but I'm not going to. On the Niners side, no Trey Lance at Wednesday practice. Meanwhile, Kyle Shanahan sounds optimistic at Jimmy Garoppolo being ready to play this week coming off of his calf issue. Seems like Jimmy Garoppolo will reclaim the starting job as long as his calf is ready to go. And I honestly wouldn't feel the need to cling to Trey Lance in any one quarterback leagues. I've certainly seen some folks who seem like they want to, but I don't think there's ultimate ceiling to Trey Lance this year.
I mean, there's still ceiling if he gets on the field. I'm with you. I don't think he's gonna unless Garoppolo gets hurt again. Shanahan's kind of been saying Lance isn't ready, and everything we've seen, I kind of think that's true. He's just not there as a passer yet. So I'm with you. I think Lance is droppable. I think Garoppolo is going to start Sunday night. That's good news for Deebo Samuel. I think it's going to mean more passing out of San Francisco, more accurate passes from Jimmy Garoppolo. It's a good matchup here too. The Colts, by the way, first in Football Outsiders run defense rankings, 29th against the pass. So that's about as pass funnily of a defense as you can get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you want to say that it's good news for pass catchers, but that really is just Deebo Samuel at this point, because Brandon Ayuk has one game of more than 2 catches. George Kittle's still on IR, so it's Deebo and really nothing else. The backfield got Elijah Mitchell back in week 5 before last week's bye. He saw 90% of the halfback carries in that game and both of the targets for the position, so I think he is a volume-based starting option this week. I would start Elijah Mitchell over Dearness Johnson, for example.
Yep, me too. 68% of the snaps for Mitchell in his return in week 5. Again, the matchup's tough. Indy's 4th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. But I mean, if this Niners running game is going, they can run on anyone.
I do think, for that reason, I think Trey Sermon, who has been dropped in some places now, remains stashable if you can afford to do so. He got dropped actually in my main event league and got claimed for like $508 or something like that.
Wow. I would not spend $508 on him, but he should definitely be owned. I mean, I think Sermon and Ayuk should be owned just to see what their roles are coming out of the bye week.
Yeah, I wouldn't feel like either one is somebody you can't drop if you really need that spot for somebody. But if you have a spot to play with and you're like, well, I'm going to hold Marlon Mack just in case he gets traded, I would definitely rather have either Brandon Ayuk or Trey Sermon.
Agreed.
Jeff Wilson's another name that's kind of been bouncing around, but the last I saw is the Niners still don't expect him back until late November. So really, nobody knows for sure at this point if he's going to be relevant to their offense at all this season.
Yeah, I mean, he's still Jeff Wilson. Like I get it, but I think they like Elijah Mitchell, and we'll see if Sermon can get it going.
He is Jeff Wilson Jr. at least. He's younger than the actual Jeff Wilson.
Sure.
New Orleans Saints at Seattle Seahawks to close out the week in almost the crappiest way possible. Really, some garbage bookends with Cleveland, Denver tonight, and New Orleans, Seattle on Monday night for this weekend. But we'll hit the game because there are guys playing it. Saints are 5-point favorites on the road. That's up 1.5 from where it opened, and over under of 43 points. The Saints did designate Traquan Smith to return this week from IR. Ian Rappaport, however, says that Michael Thomas is still, quote, multiple weeks from returning. So we'll see about any further updates on that. We'll also see whether Smith is actually ready to play this week, because just because he's returning from IR, just because he's being activated from there or designated to return doesn't mean that he's necessarily on the active roster yet.
Yeah, we'll see about that. Shouldn't be in your plans anyway. I think Marquez Callaway is the one Saints receiver to talk about. His production the past few weeks has just been fluky. I mean, he caught the Hail Mary. He had a couple other long touchdowns. He is still just 87th among wide receivers in our expected fantasy points. This Saints team just doesn't want to pass if they don't have to. I'm not sure they're going to have to pass much in this game against Geno Smith and the Seahawks. I mean, it's a good matchup for Callaway. The Seahawks secondary is not good. But he still comes with a super low floor because you could just get 18 pass attempts out of the Saints any game.
Yeah, he doesn't rate well in expected fantasy points, but he's behind only Donovan Peoples-Jones in unexpected fantasy points. 4 catches, 85 yards, 2 touchdowns his last time out on 8 targets for Callaway. That's the first game of more than 5 targets for him this year. And those numbers bring his season averages up to 2.6 receptions and 44.4 yards per game. So I guess it's up to you whether that belongs in your week 7 lineup. Really, it's just Alvin Kamara and nothing else on the Saints side at least until Michael Thomas comes back.
Yep.
On the Seahawks side, no practice report yet because they're playing Monday night. So the first one will come out Thursday. I think the biggest thing that we're looking for there is the participation of Alex Collins, who came away from, he left the Sunday night game late with hip/glute injuries. I don't know exactly what the deal is there, but we'll see about his participation this week. And it might be even more interesting because Pete Carroll says that Rashad Penny will be, quote, back to full speed this week, whatever his full speed looks like at this point.
Yeah, Collins ran it really well against Pittsburgh. That's a tough matchup. I didn't like him much last week, but he was impressive. We'll see about him and Penny. I mean, if both those guys are active, it's going to be a tough situation, especially in a pretty tough matchup against the Saints. Like, I would try not to use either guy and just kind of see what the workload split looks like. If you get Collins without Penny or Penny without Collins, then I think, that guy becomes like an RB2.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Chris Carson, of course, is currently on IR, so we'll see how soon he can come back. And if Geno Smith is not killing DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, he is at least holding their heads underwater until they start struggling.
So Geno had 104 air yards last week. That was the lowest by any team all season. You know, there was just no opportunity for these wide receivers to do anything. Metcalf finished the week 46th among wide receivers in expected fantasy points. Tyler Lockett was wide receiver 55 in expected fantasy points. The Saints have actually struggled against wide receivers. They're 28th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. But man, that was a good matchup against Pittsburgh last week too, and both these guys disappointed. So, I mean, Metcalf and Lockett are like I'd call them benchable. I know teams probably can't this week with all the teams on bye, but to me, they are not must starts with Geno Smith in there.
I agree. I think I sat Tyler Lockett for somebody. I can't remember. Actually, I think I was about to sit him and then realized that the other guy was on bye and still thought hard about it. 104 air yards. That's like what Patrick Mahomes throws underhand each week.
Cortland Sutton had like 240 something by himself last week.
They should play Cortland Sutton or maybe even Kendall Hinton at quarterback instead of Geno Smith this week.
Exactly.
That's going to do it for this Week 7 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to DraftSharks.com now to see our full Week 7 rankings to help you finalize your lineup decisions. Check out the My Teams page for customized lineup recommendations and help with the free agent finder. You can also find us anytime in the free Draft Sharks Discord. You can find the link to join there in the description for this podcast, wherever you might be consuming it. For Jared Smola and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.